I was on social media the other day, and I came across a post by the London Dungeon about them adding Boudicca to their Wicked Woman collection at the venue. Reading through the comments, there were a lot of strong opinions on the matter, arguing for and against her being called wicked. This has got me thinking. Was Boudicca wicked? How do we, in the 21st century, define a person as being wicked? And can someone be wicked, but justified in their wickedness? Or is it an absolute that you are wicked and therefore should not be a hero or heroine for that matter? Here's a picture of a statue of the Victorian image of Boudicca. In the English Renaissance, a period of time from the late 15th to early 17th centuries, when the medieval English started thinking outside the box and coming up with new ideas, people started to take an interest in Boudicca again, and by the Victorian era, she was a popular symbol of British nationalism. In fact, she became so associated with empire and Britishness that Prince Albert had this very statue erected near the Houses of Parliament in her honour. However, the designer was more interested in making her look as impressive as possible, and fashioned the chariot she's in a Scythian style rather than the one used by the ancient Britons. The Britons were illiterate before the arrival of the Romans, so, as is often the case in history, our only sources are from the same side. Now we have two sources. One is Publius Cornelius Tacitus, and the other is Cassius Dio. The former is whom I will be quoting in this video, and I am using his writing about the revolt as my main source of information. From what I've read, Cassius Dio is a bit naff, and his account isn't great, as he doesn't actually mention the fact that Boudicca was abused and her daughter's rapes, and focuses more on the savagery of the Britons, as is often the case with Roman writers. Tacitus' account is therefore more reliable, not only because of this, but also because he lived much closer to the time, and his father was the governor of Britannia during the revolt, which happened in 60 to 61 AD. He is also famous for being more sympathetic to the Celts, and therefore is more likely to be accurate when telling of their misfortunes than other more patriotic Roman authors at the time, who would always show them being the barbarians and the aggressors and the fools, whereas the Romans were the noble heroes instilling a sort of civilization upon them. Now, so before I get into the wickedness debate, let's quickly go over why Boudicca got brutal. In AD 43, the Romans invaded Britain. It's important to remember that at this time, Britain, or indeed England, Scotland and Wales, weren't unified countries. The Britons, having arrived roughly a millennium prior to the Roman invasions, lived in many tribes that warred profusely with one another. This made it a lot easier for the Romans to invade, because they played one tribe off another if they were traditional enemies, and when they had weakened each other enough, they would subjugate both. It's kind of similar to the Europeans and the Native Americans, a theme that will crop up a lot in this video. This area in red shows the land held by a tribe called the Iceni at the time of the Roman invasion. Now, most people would say Iceni, but the word Iceni comes from Latin, and in Latin you pronounce the C, at least in classical Latin, which is what the Romans would have spoken in this period. You pronounce the C like a K, like a hard C. So, for example, Julius Caesar in English is how you would pronounce it, how most people pronounce it, but actually in classical Latin it would be pronounced Julius Caesar. So, in this video I'll be saying Iceni because it comes from the Latin and I'm a languages nerd and I know this sort of thing. This Victorian era painting, a work of complete fantasy and most likely nothing like what he actually looked like. That's too many likes in one sentence, I really need to cut some out of there, otherwise people are going to dislike this video. Anyway, he was called Prastutagus, and he was the king of the Iceni. Now, his wife was called Boudicca, and that's how Boudicca comes into the story. The version of events I'm about to tell is according to Tactius Annals, which was published when he died in AD 117. Before passing away, that's going to be a real nightmare to say, Prastutagus declared that upon his death he would split his tribe's lands evenly between the Roman Emperor Nero and his wife Boudicca in a hope of maintaining good relations with the Romans and therefore preserve his tribe. When he kicked the bucket in 60 AD, Boudicca and Nero split the land and lived side by side for decades as happy neighbours getting on with their lives peacefully. Yeah, not quite. Was Nero going to be nice and just get along? Nope. He annexes Boudicca's land, and to make clear that the new arrangement would not include her, he had the Iceni queen flogged and ordered the rape of her daughters. What a This of course personally affected Boudicca, but more of this behaviour became commonplace in Britain as the Romans sought to assert their dominance over the conquered Britons. Boudicca rallied several tribes to follow her Iceni into battle, and together they sacked the city of Colchester and destroy the 9th Legion thereafter. Next they move on to London, and as they did in Colchester, they slaughter everyone within the city walls. Tacitus quotes this number to exceed 70,000. And these aren't soldiers, these aren't the people who had any choice in what happened to Boudicca and the Iceni. These were just ordinary Romano-British people living inside the Roman city, so many of these people were actually Britons. The Iceni and other tribes that followed Boudicca raped and pillaged inside the cities for several days, destroying much of the fine architecture and ruining the beautiful temple at Colchester. After London, St Albans is set to flame and its people to the sword. Again, tens of thousands of civilians perish. By this time, the governor of Britain had assembled an army and marches his to meet Boudicca's. They meet at Watling Street, which is in present-day London, and the two sides clash. Due to the Romans choosing the battleground and the Britons blocking their escape route with their supply trains and families, the Britons are soundly beaten and slaughtered. Boudicca is reported to have taken her and her daughter's lives, and so ended the rebellion of the Iceni in 61 AD.